attention to the destruction of the 3 World Trade Center towers in New York City on September 11, 2001, and a whole lot more. This is 9/11 Freefall, the show. I'm Bernie Suarez, and I'm here with Steele, coming to you on shortwave radio, courtesy WWCR. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the 9/11 Freefall radio show here on shortwave radio. This is a program, I want to remind everyone, which is primarily committed to the scientific evidence surrounding the events of 9/11. This show is committed to exposing the official story narrative of 9/11, and this show is committed to bringing attention to an organization called Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, a nonprofit organization dedicated to the pursuit of academic truth with respect to the events of 9/11. Andy Steele, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Oh, I'm doing great, Bernie. I'm really excited about this episode, as we'll be getting into it more and more. And week after week, we come back here and we talk the scientific truth about that horrible event that happened 11 years ago, and we're not going to quit. The evidence is not going to go away, and neither are we.
Absolutely. And, well, I guess one of the things we always throw in at the beginning, people are reminded, Architects and Engineers, an organization of volunteers, a nonprofit organization, can be contacted. You go to ae911truth.org, and you can find out all about this organization, which has done a lot of work, a lot of volunteers, a lot of people that care about humanity and care about the world and care about 9/11 and the families and what really happened, and are dedicated to the science of 9/11 and getting some justice someday soon. On that website, people can click on it. There's an opportunity to check out the latest articles. There's information about the evidence at the top. There's a lot of links there. You can click on evidence and read. It'll take you hours, maybe days, to go over all the evidence that's available there, as well as a section, we tapped on it a little bit last week, frequently asked questions. There's a lot of other links, but we want to also mention when you do go to ae911truth.org, check out Experts Speak Out. There's a banner there for that, a nationwide tour that ended a couple of weeks ago that has the newest documentary by Architects and Engineers, one expert after another, all talking about the evidence of the science of 9/11. Now, so we want to mention that. Also, there's also some other stuff going on over at AE recently. You want to talk about that a little bit, Andy?
Sure. Right now, we have one of our volunteers, Rena Patty, is going to be doing a bike tour across the nation for AE 9/11 Truth to raise awareness for that. So we're going to be bringing you details about that tour, and hopefully getting Rena on, maybe even from the road if it's possible, to kind of keep us updated. So we're going to be doing a lot to bring attention to that, and there should be articles coming out about that in the next coming week or 2 weeks.
Right on. And good for her. This is unbelievable. I mean, she's, I think it's a few of them that are taken up, and they're riding from, I think it's from the Washington State, all the way on the West Coast, all the way across to New York. So that ought to be very interesting. I want to commend her. That's a lot of effort and that just shows you the passion that some people at AE have and how determined they are to get the truth out there and just get public awareness of the issue. And I'm so glad she's doing that. And for everyone at AE and everyone else out there that's still pushing pedal to the metal on this issue of 9/11 truth. A lot of people think, it's been more than 10 years now. It's an old issue. We don't have to talk about it anymore. But I guess we don't agree with that, and we can't agree with that. We have to keep going. This crime that took place on September 11th has impacted the world, all of our lives, the families, just everyone has been affected in one way or another by this event on that day. So that's good. We'll be keeping an eye on that tour. And like you said, Andy, hopefully we'll get Rena on here and talk a little bit more about what she's doing. So anyway, last week we like to do recaps. We try to keep some kind of format. Last week we talked we went over a couple of frequently asked questions, and we discussed some answers to that. And we don't, anybody wants to listen to that, go ahead and go to 911freefall.com and listen in to any of our previous shows. You can just look at the interface there and click play for the show that you want to listen to, and you can listen all about it. And we do have a lot of questions on there. We're making it a habit to throw out some questions every week, so maybe we'll be looking to do that again this week. We also talked about the pile driver theory, and I offered, what the official story is built on, and that's in terms of their version of the science. We've been talking a lot about the computer model science, and we put some links on 9/11 freefall for people to kind of get a view on what these computer model simulations are all about, and hopefully we gained some ground in getting people to wrap their heads around these theories, and particularly the pile driver theory, which is nothing but a hoax. I did the best I could to explain that, and we'll go over that again, and especially with our guests here today, which we're going to go into in a minute. And we've been talking, just for the sake of our audience, I've been hammering away the last few weeks. We've been talking about the National Construction Safety Team Act, NIST, and just the building blocks of what is behind the official story and the pseudoscience that is behind the official story. And that is why people should reconsider this theory. What do you say about that, Andy?
Well, I mean, it's a constant rabbit hole you go down just as you learn the scientific truth about this event. And, like you said earlier, if you go to the scientific evidence page at AE 9/11 Truth, you can spend days as this whole story that we've been given by NIST unravels in front of you. And so it is a fiction. It's a fiction that we've been sold. But right now, people are waking up, but we need to get the message out more. We need to spread this. We need to reach as many people as possible, and that's why we need your help at AE 9/11 Truth.
Absolutely. And, we also took some jabs at two individuals, and that was probably my decision, or I'm not sure. Two individuals that come to mind in terms of what we're dealing with, in terms of people that are just sharing disinformation about the science, and if you would, making our jobs a little bit more difficult. We kind of exposed an individual by the name of Chris Moore, and we exposed Mr.
Dave Thomas
from New Mexico Science and Reason last week. And the reason we bring up these names is so that people can know. Do your Google search and realize that there are individuals that are fighting the truth of the science. And this was brought up last week in the context of the science being under attack. And it's being put under attack by individuals that are choosing, or either they're painfully confused about the science, or they're choosing to disseminate disinformation about the basic science. And when the science is under attack, we have to keep hammering away, and that's one of the main purposes of this show. So we just wanted to spend some time on that. Chris Moore, who is he's apparently a Denver investigation journalist. I'm not aware of him having any scientific background out there, just telling people and trying to engage in debates against the science. And also Dave Thomas from New Mexico Science and Reason defending the pile driver theory. So we'll get into that a little bit more. And we also talked about we talked about Newton's laws a little bit, and how that ties into the understanding of this whole issue. And last but not least, we talked with our audience about a couple of YouTube channels, and one of the members, one of the individuals who owns and operates one of these YouTube channels discussing scientific videos is with us today. So one was Physics and Reason, a channel that people should go to, and there's a lot of experiments and a lot of explanations, a lot of very educational, simple videos that are entertaining and just powerful, if you ask me. Explaining a lot of these issues of the science of 9/11. And then there's a channel for David Chandler 911, who we are thrilled to have with us today. And that channel, we encourage people to go ahead and go to that channel, and you'll be on there. You'll be in that channel for a few days probably, looking at those videos and learning from that. So, okay, so that was what we did last week, Andy. This week, we're going to do a few other things, and we're going to do what we have been doing now for a few weeks before we move forward into this week's plans and this week's agenda. We're going to take a moment of silence, and we're going to measure about 10 seconds of silence to remember the family victims of 9/11, and we'll take that starting now. Okay, and our hearts and our minds go out to all the victims of 9/11, and we just feel that it's just a good thing to do. It's only 10 seconds, and I do it for no other reason to keep myself focused and remind myself why we're doing this. Okay, so this week, I also want to mention, disclaimer, we want to mention some of the opinions expressed on this show. We do speak about the science, of course, and we do encourage people to go to AE 9/11 Truth, but just in general, some of the opinions expressed on this show just do not necessarily represent the opinions of architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. They just expressed on this show, so we want to make that clear to everyone. All right, one of the things we've been doing, Andy, we've been posing some questions. Our question for this week is, first of all, I want to challenge everyone to, if you want to answer this question or speak, leave a message for us, we'll give you an option of calling this number. The number is 510-292-4515. And the question is, this week, how do you feel about NIST? That's the National Institute of Standards and Technology. How do you feel about NIST not accounting for Newton's laws in their explanation of the pile driver theory? So again, how do you feel about NIST not accounting for Newton's laws in their explanation of the pile driver theory, or essentially the theory that is put out there by by NIST regarding the destruction of the World Trade Center tower? So there you go, 510-292-4515 is the number. Get involved, talk to us, leave us a message, and see what you think. Tell us what you think. So with that said, Andy, I guess we're going to introduce our guest here. Now, the guest that we have today, first of all, his name is David Chandler, and if that name sounds familiar, or if it doesn't, we want to introduce him to our show. And this gentleman, he has a bachelor's degree in physics and engineering. It's actually an independent program back in the 60s. Now he's got where they allow you to get multiple degrees, but he didn't stop there. He's got a master's in education. He also has a master's in mathematics. He recently retired, and he has been retired from educating. He's been an educator at the elementary school level, K through 12, in physics, mathematics, and astronomy. And this gentleman has been on the editorial board of the Journal of American Association of Physics Teacher. And if that's not enough, he is an independent 9/11 researcher, has done an unbelievable amount of work tackling the NIST theories and exposing the truth of 9/11 science. And this gentleman is also on the board for International Center for 9/11 Studies, which also sponsored the Toronto hearings. Without any further ado, David Chandler, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Well, glad to be here. Thank you.
We really appreciate you coming on. I got to tell the audience right now, David Chandler, and not because you're here. I mean, you really are one of my heroes in terms of the work that you've done, the sincerity behind your work, how clear it is. I have tried to tackle the scientific issues of 9/11, and I'm not a physics teacher, and I'm not a professor. I have a lot of years of studying in physics and chemistry, but those are not my specialties. And I've done a lot to try and focus people on the pile driver theory and explain it to people, make it easy. But you have done an incredible job of simplifying it. Clearly, you're one of the experts spoken to in the new documentary with architects and engineers. The experts speak out. People can hear you from there. We've pointed people to your YouTube channel, which has an incredible amount of information. Again, thanks for your contribution. Defending the integrity of the science of 9/11. So I guess my first question, would be simply tell us about how you got involved in 9/11 and tell us a little bit about that early stage in your life and how, in terms of your 9/11 truth movement and your involvement in the 9/11 truth movement.
Okay. First, I'd like to say there's one other resource My own website, which I share with John Cole, is 911speakout.org. I don't know if you've mentioned that, but I have all of my YouTube videos, all of John Cole's YouTube videos, and a lot of other material is collected there. So that's 911speakout.org, okay?
911speakout.org. There you go, everybody. Check that website out. No, we'll definitely do some of that. Okay, well, we thank you for that.
Okay. Anyway, my early introduction to it, well, the morning of 9/11, when I woke up, I got on the computer and was checking out some things, and right away I saw that the Twin Towers were on, at least one of them, I guess the North Tower was smoking, and I woke up my wife and I said, looks like today is going to be a big news day. And then I took off to school, and I really didn't watch the events real time because I had school to teach. So we were doing that, and during the break, somebody came in from the hallway and said, "The tower has collapsed." I said, "What? You mean they're on fire, or they got hit?" But the fact that they collapsed just seemed unbelievable. And so I, along with the rest of the nation, was sort of in shock over how could that have happened. And I didn't really focus on the physics of it or anything at the beginning. I was concerned because right off the bat from day one, they were comparing it to Pearl Harbor, and they were bringing up Osama bin Laden, and they were getting ready to use this as an excuse to go to war. And it seemed like it was being abused from the very beginning, even if it were true that foreign nationals had done this attack, and that, as portrayed, it was not an excuse to go to war against Afghanistan or whoever that was who they were originally talking about attacking. So I was very much involved with trying to. I'm a Quaker, and the Friends meeting that I'm involved with, we did a general letter that we sent out to all the churches in our area, urging. We basically had queries, like questions to think about trying to get some balance in all the response to this. So my early focus was really on the response that the government was doing here. It wasn't for a couple of years, or several years, I'm not sure, I think it was probably about 2006 maybe, but that would be about 5 years after the fact. But my sister, who's an English professor, she attended a conference in which she got some materials and some videos, and she got very interested in the issue of 9/11. And she realized that there were some technical issues involved, and so she approached me and said, "You really need to check this out." And so I watched her videos, and the first thing that really caught my eye that I actually latched onto was the North Tower. When it was coming down, you could see material being ejected from it at apparently very high speed, and went all the way across the street and seemed to hit a building across the street. And I realized, just sitting there, hey, I could measure how fast that's going from some simple information. So I just literally freeze-framed the video at a couple points, and I took a ruler up to the television set, and I did an estimate, and I figured that this stuff was being ejected somewhere in the vicinity of 60 miles an hour.
Wow.
And it appeared to be heavy material because it had a huge train of material following it. And so it was like a big streamer of material going at that kind of a speed from high in the building. And this was initiated when the building hadn't even collapsed that far. And here's stuff already being thrown out at those kinds of speeds. So it was literally going horizontally faster than the building was coming down at that point. And that really, that first measurement sort of hooked me, and in terms of realizing that you can actually find some stuff out about this by applying some of the physics that I already knew. And I got on from there. I got on to Jim Hoffman's website, and I think you have to Google that, or you can go from my website. I have links to all of these, but I have a links page there. But
Okay.
Jim Hoffman's site, it's like 9/11 Research, but it has a lot of other stuff in the URL, so I'm not quite sure how to reference it easily. But it was a hugely encyclopedic approach to what was known and the various theories and the various observations, and it's a very high quality website, and that was how I got educated about what was known to that point. I think Stephen Jones has mentioned that he got his education on when he first got into it. So Jim Hoffman has done a tremendous service. He's like the grandfather of all of the truth movement as far as the scientific end, because he brought it all together in one place and really helped us get our grounding in the basics. So then I was off and running, and the next turning point for me was I gave a few talks locally to like Unitarian Church and so forth, and I sort of pulled together, and by pulling this material together enough to give a coherent talk about it, it really focused my attention more clearly on what the issues were. And then one talk that I decided I would do. I'm a part of a group that gets together every year down to Occidental College in Southern California. It's called the Occidental Physics Teachers Day. Mm-hmm. And I thought, I wonder if they would allow me to give a talk there. So I inquired, and the guy who's ahead of it says, well, let me ask around, see if anybody would be offended by that or if that would be all right to do. And he gave me a green light. So then I realized, this is a few months out in the future, and I realized that I'm talking to a different audience here, because this is guys that are, quantitative. They know the physics, they know the math, and I needed to actually not just give sort of what we call a hand-waving kind of an argument, but really nail it down. So I had a tool that I had used in the classroom called Physics Toolkit, which enables you to step through videos frame by frame and track the motions of objects. And this is a very crude tool, but it was useful for classroom purposes, and that's what I had at the time. By the way, I've since moved up to a much better tool. If anybody wants to do this kind of thing, it's called Tracker, and I have links to these on my website as well. So
now,
in any case, go ahead.
I was going to ask you, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Now, these are programs, right, that you're using, computer programs that are actually, so, okay, now that's amazing, that whole story. So up until, from 2001, when you see this building being destroyed, you kind of sense there's something wrong. This is very similar to when we had Wayne Cost on here, kind of similar kind of story where you're kind of riding along, not wanting to believe or even wrap your head around the implications of what that might mean. And I did the same thing. I didn't realize, for as much as I think that I understand science, I didn't even question any of this until 2008. And that's when someone showed me loose change. And so it's amazing how we all have different stories. And even yourself, with the being a physics professor and the whole thing, you see these buildings come down. You didn't put work into even questioning it per se, but you kind of start realizing that something doesn't fit. So it just... and then I see how it's amazing how you describe the response, and you're kind of noticing these other things that are going around. So it is very interesting to see that just your simple observation, seeing the ejections coming out at 60 miles an hour faster than the building itself is coming down, how that becomes the red flag, and here we are years later. So that is incredibly fascinating. So go on now. So then you start getting involved. And you start using the tools, and this thing starts getting out of control. Now, I've seen some of your videos. Tell us now. You decided you're making these videos, and now did you actually start going from one place to another after this Occidental College? Do you realize now that there's a whole field in front of you to educate the public? So how did that evolve?
Okay. Well, when I made my first several analysis things with using Physics Toolkit that basically takes a video, it splits it up frame by frame. You put a marker and you can track things, and from that you can calculate speeds and accelerations and stuff like that. And I did this for the particle that it looks like a particle. It's a big chunk of material that I originally was attracted by, but I started measuring other things. I measured the fall of the roof line. I measured speeds of some of the squibs that were being shot out the sides, and I did a lot of that early material. I looked at some of the stuff that was falling, and I was looking at the waves of ejections coming out of the building that were actually keeping pace with the material that was falling through air on the outside. So here's a process within the building that's propagating down the building as fast, or approximately as fast, as material that's falling through air just a few feet away. So there's a number of these measurements that I did, and about that same time, I guess, even in preparation for the Occidental talk, I came up with a number of these little video things that I had just done specifically for the talk, but I realized this is hot stuff. So I put it on YouTube just to put it up there. And I was figuring, well, I'll put it on YouTube, then I'll use that when I give my talk. Well, that caught the attention of some of the people, I guess, from architects and engineers. They invited me onto the team, and so I was on their video team. So I just kept on doing this. I just basically was looking for what can be measured, and from those kinds of measurements, what can be determined about what's really going on. Mm-hmm. It was, I actually had sort of a dry spell until the summer of 2008. And what happened in there, I did one, I guess my first major video that I did under the auspices of architects and engineers was the one, basically the North Tower, looking at the corner of the building, and I just put it in an infinite loop just to narrate all the stuff you're seeing. It shows ejections of things firing away in rapid sequence down the corners of the building, as the North Tower comes down.
Now, which video? Now, I've watched a lot of these, and you've got the incredible North Tower collapse video explaining this. Is that the one? Okay.
That's the one.
For those of you, again, if you go to YouTube and go to the David Chandler 911 channel, that's David and then Chandler, CHANDLER 911, and look for that video. I've seen the video, and I've watched it quite a few times. I've watched it a couple of years ago, or whenever you put it out, and it's just amazing stuff. For our audience's sake, I was talking to Andy about this before this program. We want to be able to communicate this to the audience in as simplest terms as possible. Of course, maybe not everyone went to their high school physics course. They should have. And we want to remind, on the one hand, we want to let people know that a lot of this is high school physics, and you don't need a special degree to understand any of this. But at the same time, maybe some people didn't even take that, or they forgot their high school physics, and that allows people like Chris Moore to jump right in and fill in the blanks. But we are talking about basic high school science here, basic high school physics. So we do want to. Last week, David, I put out, we talked about the pile driver theory, and my best way of explaining this to the audience, and maybe you could jump in and kind of explain it a little better. Essentially, the NIST's theory is essentially saying that with respect to the North and South Towers, apparently they didn't think World Trade Center 7 was important enough to at least talk about it at first. But just in terms of the North and South Towers, the theory is, and for our audience, this is the pile driver theory again, that after the compromising of the towers as a result of the airplane crashing into it, and that essentially the top part of the tower, in both cases, acted as a hammer. Essentially, at some point, the connections gave way, and the top part of the building hit the lower part of the building with enough force. Just with that gravitational force, they claim that it was enough to break all the energy of all the floors below it, which was a lot bigger, a lot stronger, and a lot more solid, like a hammer, essentially. So they call it a pile driver theory. Now, maybe you can talk a little bit about that, and maybe we can explain to the audience the journey in terms of NIST and what was the pancake collapse theory, and how they they switched over. I guess they changed their theory at some point, didn't they? And you want to talk a little bit about that transfer of the theories and the pile driver theory?
Okay. Well, early on, my first introduction to, like, I was very curious about, like I mentioned, how could these buildings have come down? And there was a NOVA program which explained it in terms of pancake collapse. In other words, once the floors started coming, you get an accumulation of floors that would pile on the next one and break it, and so it would be like a stack of records, the old style record players where they would be stacked up like that. They'd just come down and one would hit the next. That was what's called a pancake collapse. Problem with that is, and one thing they didn't even talk about at the beginning, was the structure of the towers. Is what you have is perimeter walls that are made of very strong steel, it turns out, and then you have a core structure which is 47 very massive columns that are very strongly braced, so they form a building within a building, literally. And if you have the floors collapsing down, you're going to see the central core left sticking up in the sky. And so this pancake collapse theory doesn't really account for the destruction of the core structure of the buildings. And what we actually saw was the whole building coming down. And in fact, if you notice on the North Tower, that's the one with the antenna, the very first thing that starts moving, the roof line starts coming down with the antenna. So the antenna's motion, the antenna is supported directly by that core structure. So even before you've collapsed as far as one story, the antenna is already moving down, which means the core is failing. And 47 very massive columns, how are they going to simultaneously fail to enable the antenna, which they support, to start the whole process as this comes down? That's just incredible. The only thing I can even imagine is doing that is if you cut the columns with explosives.
Absolutely.
Any idea that there's a gradual progression doesn't make any sense at all. So excuse me, go ahead.
So I'm sorry for it. And one of the now, does NIST actually address this specific issue? And I know you've been involved in the interaction with NIST. Have you written to them, and have they responded to you officially on the issue, or did they at the time? Or tell us about that.
Well, I didn't interact with them about the North Tower. I did talk to them about Building 7, but let me finish on the North Tower for a minute.
Okay, go.
NIST theory on the North Tower is that along the wall that we don't see, and this is common with what they're doing, they're always taking the cause for what we do see to be, on the other side of the building, because there were very few cameras showing what was happening on the south side of the building. And so we're looking at the north side, everybody looking down Manhattan toward these buildings. But on the south side, they're claiming that the perimeter walls buckled, and somehow this started the progression. But they don't really account for how you can get all of those core columns to fail simultaneously to allow this antenna to start its descent. So that's a big, it's a very weak spot in their thinking on the subject.
Now, let me ask you again, let me jump in again. Now, am I correct that the elevator shafts were apparently directly, in that core column, or
that's right,
or something? Okay.
If you have as far as if you were to use explosives, the question that people raise is how would you get them in the building with nobody noticing? Well, you have workers, you put on uniforms, and you haul pallets of stuff into the elevators, and you go up there, and you put little yellow or orange cones out in front of the elevator and say, work in progress, and nobody questions that kind of thing. So you basically, if you have access to the elevator shafts, you really have access to those core columns. And so that appears to be what they must have done in order to load this with the explosives, or at least the dominant amount of that. But so once this starts coming out, there was a professor of engineering. I'm not quite sure how to say his name, but it's something like Zdeněk Bazant, and he came out with which is basically the pile driver theory, literally a day after 9/11, and it was published just within days like that. And
really?
Nothing gets published within days. And so what kind of peer review is going to happen that quickly? And who's going to be able to, how do you possibly verify anything? So he basically came out with a scenario that says that the upper section of the North Tower was somehow where the impact occurred, it broke the connections and stuff, and this thing started coming down, and that it crushed the lower section of the building. And so he said it was crushed down, and he envisioned, in fact, his little drawing showed the upper section staying intact. And so this intact upper section crushed down the whole building until it got down to the rubble pile, and then crushed down was followed by crush up, as he called it. That was his terminology.
Well, that's amazing. And this is what is this, one day after 9/11?
I believe it's 1 or 2 days. Out? It was very, very fast.
I didn't even know about that.
And this is just, the physics is terrible. It doesn't work that way, because when two objects come together, Newton's third law says that the forces are going to be equal and opposite. So if I push on you, you're simultaneously pushing on me. If we bang our heads together, we're both going to get our heads hurt, right? And and so if you have this top section of the building colliding and destroying what's under it, it's going to be happening in both directions. And in fact, what you see, if you actually look at the videos, is the top section is being destroyed even ahead of time. The top section is the first thing to be destroyed. And so by the time the bottom section of the building starts to come down, the top section is already collapsed like an accordion to about half its size. And so we have basically what's turning into rubble, and that's not going to be able to present a unified force to crush the columns. Now, see, that's the thing. You can maybe account for, breaking some floors and so forth, but the idea is if you're going to crush the column structure in the interior of the building, you have to have something that would literally act like a pile driver, because these are those things sticking up there, and you have to push down on them until they buckle and break. And if you have just loose rubble, you have no pile driver. You have no hammer. Mm-hmm. Secondly, I want to finish this thought. The other part of it is, this is the part that Tony Zamboti described in what he called the missing jolt, and Tony Zamboti and Graham McQueen. But when you have a hammer, say, hitting a nail, and in order for the hammer to apply a greater force on the nail than simply the weight of the hammerhead, okay? If you rest the hammerhead on a nail, it's probably not going to push it into a board. It's going to maybe push it into a piece of styrofoam, but it wouldn't push it into a piece of wood, right?
Correct.
So if the way that the hammer is able to exert a greater force than just its weight is you give the hammer some momentum, and the excess momentum gets transferred into this excess force. And in order to create the excess force, you have to lose momentum. You're transferring momentum into force. And if you don't lose momentum, you don't have the excess force. Well, what does it mean to lose momentum? Momentum is mass times velocity. The only way that it can lose momentum is to slow down. It has to decelerate. So when the hammer hits the nail, the hammer forces the nail, but the nail pushes back and slows down the hammerhead until it stops the hammerhead. Then you have to pick it up and hit it again. And so the reason you have to wham, wham, wham with a hammer is every time it exerted that great force on the nail slowed down the hammer till it stopped. Okay? Mm-hmm. So anytime you have a pile driver, the thing that's coming down like the hammerhead or a sledgehammer or a pile driver on a dock or whatever it is, it's going to get slowed down in the process. Now, when you do the measurements, you take the roof line of the North Tower, it never slows down. It accelerates downward throughout the entire interaction. And the fact that it never slows down says it's never making contact. So it's literally like driving a hammer into styrofoam. Or in this case, it's like the top section of the building is not crushing the lower section. It's literally falling into pre-pulverized material below it. And so this is really proof that the actual destruction of the building had to have been caused by something other than this top section crushing down. That really seriously is proof that there had to have been a demolition going on, which is destroying the resistance ahead of the fall of this top section.
Wow, and that is crystal clear to me. I understand that, and we do appreciate you discussing that issue. Now, Andy, I know you have some questions for David.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Now, I want to talk a little bit about World Trade Center 7. David, you've got a video out on YouTube called NIST Finally Admits to Free Fall, and it takes place at NIST Live Technical Briefing, and to me it's a very, not only informative video, but very also entertaining to see Shyam Sunder respond or try to respond to a very good question you proposed. So, our audience can look it up on YouTube. It's called NIST Finally Admits to Free Fall. But I would, if you can, please talk about that video and give us the background on that.
Okay. What happened was Building 7 got left out of the original the original NIST report talked only about the towers and didn't even talk about Building 7. And then Building 7, they did a separate report that came out right at the end of the Bush administration. In fact, the report came out after the election during the lame duck period. But there was a preliminary release that was done in August of that year, August of 2008. It was called Final Draft for Public Comment. And they put out a number of drafts leading up to this. When that draft came out, I noticed that it had some information in it that would enable me to calibrate my videos better. And so I did a measurement. In other words, in order to do a video measurement, you have to have some knowledge of a real-world distance that you can transform and how many pixels represent how many meters or whatever. And so that's called calibration. And my earlier videos were sort of crudely calibrated on this point on Building 7 because the blueprints weren't out there, and I didn't know exactly what the various measurements were. But that information was in their report. So I redid my measurement of the coming down of Building 7's roof line, and what I discovered was if you take the overall fall, it was slower than free fall. But I noticed that it was steeper at the beginning, and if I take just the first few seconds, like the first 2.5 seconds, it was coming down absolutely at free fall. And it was just amazing. It just literally let go and dropped just like you drop a pin from one hand to the other, your car keys. That's just like bang, you let go and it falls. And that was what the building did. So I was amazed at this, and then I was involved with architects and engineers at that time and on the email list, and somebody pointed out that NIST was going to have a technical briefing, and wouldn't it be good if we had some people in there to ask questions? So I started to look into that, and it turned out that in order to apply, you had to be, it wasn't just anybody, you had to be an engineer or a scientist, and you had to have institutional affiliation, so like a university or a corporation or something like that. I figured, well, I guess that leaves me out, because I was teaching at a high school level at that time, and I figured, well, that's not going to count. But in any case, it came down to the wire, and I figured, what the heck, I'm going to apply anyway. And so I simply put down for my institutional affiliation American Association of Physics Teachers, which is our teachers organization nationwide. And I figured that sounded official enough, so I wondered if they would accept it. Well, sure enough, they sent me a password. Literally, they sent it to me 5 minutes before the conference started. And I was literally getting ready to walk out the door and go to school. But I checked my email, and there was the password. I logged in, and I jotted down a question and sent it off. And I basically said hear what I said actually if you listen to the video. But essentially, what I said was, since there's any number of people who have done this measurement and have seen that the roof line of Building 7 is coming down within a few percent, I give them a little margin, within a few percent of free fall, how could they claim that it's coming down 40% slower than free fall, which was their claim at that time? I mean, it was so far off from what anybody, it's right out there in public sight. I basically use the phrase that how can such a publicly visible, easily measurable quantity be set aside? I remember that phrase because it's like it's right out in the open. It's not like all that stuff they're theorizing about what happened deep inside the building. And so I just put out the question and went to school, and I had no idea whether they were going to ask the question or anything. In fact, I didn't know for a couple of weeks that they actually had asked the question, and somebody wrote to me, and they talked about it, and actually did a transcript and told me what they said. And it was amazing. It was just gibberish. And it was like, whoa. And so one of the guys in Architects and Engineers is really into video. He's like our archivist. And so I put him on the task of, can you capture this video? It was on the NIST website, but it was in a format that was very hard to capture. So he got the video, and I was able to then take a clip out of that, and I put that as a video showing that technical conference. So actually there were two questions that were asked there that were very simple questions, and that was the key. They were very direct and therefore very hard to quibble about. And so it was mine about how can you say it's coming down 40% slower than free fall. And then Stephen Jones asked another question, which was, in the NIST report there was a clear, obvious error where it said that on the assumption that the building was coming down at constant speed. Well, it's not coming down at constant speed. If you drop a rock, it's going to be accelerating, and it's clearly accelerating just by looking at it. So he just said, how come you said it's coming at constant speed when it's clearly accelerating? Now, that one is such an incredibly simple question. They should have said, oh, we meant acceleration, and that would be the end of it. But John Gross got into there, and he's the star of the show. It's like, here he is, determined that he's not going to concede anything, even though it's such a blatant, obvious error on their part. And so he spends the better part of a minute, I think it was 45 seconds, I timed it once. He spends about 45 seconds saying absolutely nothing. And it's almost embarrassing to watch him. All of this is on that video, and then I go on from there. And in the process, by the way, one more thing. Sham Sunder, in responding to my question, basically says it couldn't have come down at free fall because our model doesn't come down at free fall. Is literally what he's saying. He's saying that there was a whole sequence of failures that had to take place. They couldn't have taken place all at once, and so it could not have come down at free fall, therefore it didn't come down at free fall. But guess what? You look at it, you measure it, and it does. So he literally made our case for it, that the assumption that it's a natural collapse would tell you that it could not come at free fall, and he made that case himself. And so the conclusion is, if your assumption leads to garbage, then your assumption is wrong. And so the assumption that it was a natural collapse is clearly, obviously wrong.
Now, Mr. Chandler, this kind of leads off of what you're just talking about. I learned a new term from one of your videos, and if you can explain it for our audience, it's called dry labbing. How does that relate to NIST WTC7 investigation, and what are the implications on an investigation this big? Okay.
Well, that's a term we use I don't know if it's used in the industry or not, but it's used in academic circles when say that you have a student who doesn't bother to do a lab, and so they just calculate some numbers that look like the kinds of numbers they would have expected, and they just sort of phony up the experiment to look like they did it, and they write up their lab report. So that's just called dry labbing, and it's basically the scientific equivalent of plagiarism. It's just academic dishonesty, okay? Well, here what's happening is NIST got a measurement of the fall rate of the roof line of Building 7 that took 40% longer than free fall, is what they were claiming. And in order to do that, they just used a starting time and an ending time. And they chose the starting time so early that it enabled them to make that claim, okay? So it was like they were fitting the measurement to a predetermined outcome, and it's clearly so. Furthermore, what they did was they took an event that they claim is the beginning of downward motion of the roof line, and it's where there's a single pixel that changes brightness. And they actually got that pixel to, they got that in a supposed starting point because they were looking up at the building from street level. They were looking at an angle up at the building, and the building actually flexed sideways a little bit. And so it's ambiguous. Is it coming down or is it just flexing? Is it moving away from you? And it was literally, they took that false start as the starting point of their timing, and from there till when it disappeared behind the foreground buildings is what they took as their timing. My approach was not to do a timing. I mean, when you're doing a timing, it's like taking two data points, the start and the stop, and that ignores everything that happens in between. The correct way to do it is to take it at frequent intervals during the motion, namely frame by frame as you go through the video, and actually track the motion of the building. And what you find is that from the time they started their clock, the building sat still for another, I can't remember, it's at least a second, maybe it's a second and a half. It was a significant amount of time. And then it dropped in free fall. And when it started dropping, you could measure the relative position from one pixel to the next. It is in free fall. And the fact that it's in free fall, it doesn't matter how long it sat still at the beginning. The fact that it was in free fall for a significant chunk of time tells you that there was no resistance. Because the only way something can fall at free fall is if it's falling freely. If there's any resistance, it'll fall slower than that.
Amazing stuff there. Well, David, and for our audience, again, we're talking about NIST just fabricating and tweaking around the starting time in terms of measuring the fall of the building. And one of your videos out there, I know you've got a lot of videos on your site. There's one of them that actually shows that really well. The starting time. Is it the North Tower collapse video, or is it the World Trade Center 7 video, or is it both? That it shows that time span that goes on when NIST started their clock versus when it actually starts going down.
Mm-hmm. That was Building 7.
The Building 7, okay. And for our audience, and also, we've watched some of that, and for our audience, we're exposing some of the little elements that are injected into the NIST claims that are outright wrong. I've seen some of your work, and they use the term, they use explosion thresholds and sound thresholds, which you so well expose. You want to tell us a little bit about that, how they use RDX as a standard for explosion, for sound thresholds and explosion thresholds, a little bit of that with respect to all the testimonies of explosions and how they tried to simply wipe that out.
Okay. I have a video called WTC7, Sound Evidence for Explosions, and you can find that on my site or on YouTube. Okay. What basically NIST is doing is they, again, are trying to avoid opening the can of worms of actually looking at what really happened. So they're trying to create a pretext where they can just dismiss lots of relevant data. Now, for instance, lots of people testified they heard explosions. There's Graham McQueen did a tremendous amount, taking first responders, firemen and policemen and so forth, analyzing their testimony and recognizing how many of them testified to explosions. And it was careful to say not just loud sounds, it was explosions. And so in order to avoid having to deal with that, they set a high threshold for what they would consider an explosion that would be sufficient strength so that a single explosion would fracture the main column that they say brought the building down. Okay.
Amazing.
In other words, and I don't even know if they were assuming that it was just like a bomb sitting next to a tower, or next to a column, or if they actually had like a cutter charge of some sort. In other words, they phonied up a situation where you would have, by their criteria, it had to be so loud that it was louder than any sound that was heard. And then they said, there were no sounds that loud, therefore there were no relevant explosions. And so they dismissed the whole evidence of the fact there were explosions. If you're investigating a building and people are testifying to explosions, no matter whether they meet some kind of a threshold or not, you're going to investigate that if you're an honest investigation, you know?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, we are running out of time here. David, we've had an amazing time speaking with you. We want to once again remind our audience to go to David Chandler's website, 911speakout.org. You can visit his YouTube channel, David Chandler 911, and check out all these videos. I wanted to mention we're out of time. You do have a paper called The Destruction of the World Trade Center, North Tower, and Fundamental Physics. Very good paper. That there's a link there on the website that people can read that paper. And you've done a lot of work. I wish we could have a little more time to get into all these things, but we wanted to touch on this. So we do appreciate you again coming on this show and just explaining some of the basic fundamentals of Newton's laws, pile driver theory. We're talking about the speed of the towers coming down at free fall speed and near free fall, and all the different measurements and your instruments that you've used as your tools to work for the truth. So, David, I would just want to ask you, anything going on right now? Are you involved in any tours, or are you going out lecturing anywhere? Anything exciting that you want to any last words?
I'll be showing the ESO video in Fresno soon. That's going to be in August. Also, several of us independent researchers put together a response to NIST, and we'll see in the Structural Engineering Journal. Anyway, that's we won't know for probably a year whether they publish that.
Okay, and for those of you listening to ESO, that is the Experts Speak Out, 9/11 Explosive Evidence Experts Speak Out documentary that is newly released by Architects and Engineers and can be found all over the country. Look for a showing, go on the website and set up a showing yourself so that you can show other people the evidence. And that wraps it up. Well, David Chandler, we thank you again for being with us. We thank you so much for everything you're doing, and keep doing what you're doing. Andy, since it looks like we're all set up, well, we want to thank our audience. We want to thank WWCR for this opportunity here on Shortwave Radio. So for our audience, again, this is 9/11 Freefall. I'm Bernie Suarez here with Andy Steele. Thank you, we love you, and good night and goodbye, everybody.